Okay, here's the thing about sex in literature and media. There is no purpose to it. Let me explain. If violence is something that we need to inherently teach to our children in how to use violence appropriately, sex is not something you have to teach, especially not to little children. So we'll just start there. There is no reason for sex to be in a children's book, period. Potentially, there's no reason for sex to be in a young adult book either. And the sex that we are seeing in adult books is porn. Now, there is a thing in this book, How to Read Literature Like a Professor, where he has this whole chapter about how sex is not sex. And that is true. Where in sex scenes in stories can be literary devices to propel characters forward in some way, and it can even be consensual romantic sex. But penetration should never be depicted at all. And what I mean by that is there's a huge difference between, like, even in movies where you have like two people in bed, one on top of the other with the blankets covering them, versus full-on pornos where, you can see everything that's going on. And so the real issue is that the line of what is appropriate for this sort of thing versus not is a little bit more blurry. I tend to err on the nothing below the waist if you can help it, unless you need to really drive home something that has nothing to do with tantalizing the audience. The other thing that the professor says in How to Read Literature Like a Professor is that food is usually the substitute for sex. And that is actually true, because there's something very intimate about sitting down to a meal with someone and consuming food. Food plays a huge part in most people's culture. Why do those mukbang videos or ASMR videos with food blow up? There is something about it. And you can make more of a metaphor with food than you can of actual penetrative sex. But when I say it has no purpose, is that outside of maybe literary devices, and they have to be literary, they have to be metaphorical, sex has to mean something else in this context. It can't just be porn. It doesn't have the same moralistic need that we have to do with violence. So you don't have to teach people sex. Sex is something that most of us naturally pick up on in our teenage years when we hit puberty. And children do not have a natural sex drive. Now, children explore their bodies from a very young age. That is true, but that's not sexual, and that shouldn't be sexual. And I can't believe I have to even say that, right? But even when we hit puberty, what children or what young adults need to learn in terms of sex has little to do with how to have it, and more to do with how to have it safely. And therefore, depictions of porn tend to be actually very detrimental to children and adults' well-being, because it tends to give them unrealistic understanding of the sexual act and what it means to have sex. This is the reality of, like, each partner you're going to have sex with, you're going to have to learn how to have sex with them. It's not simple, and it is something you learn together, and it is something you will instinctually know how to do. And I know there's everyone who's going to get up in arms, but what about the Victorians and the prudish societies and yada yada? I grew up in one, okay? I did. I grew up in a very religious society where I personally, my family, I had access to books and stuff that, whatever, I can argue for and against, but I knew a lot of people who didn't, and we still knew what sex was. It's I have found personally that the ones who don't know what they're doing on their wedding night are not always the brightest people in the world, and also I think willfully avoiding some natural urges that we have for many, many reasons. And so, yes, there's the argument about the overly religious, prudish societies that, stifle any sort of sexual exploration from a young age. And I don't mean having sex with another partner, I just mean even when children explore their bodies, they call that sinful, and that's not okay. Children need to explore their bodies. There's a lot to say about that. Is literature going to change that? No. In fact, most of those people are not going to read those books generally, and also that's not something they would ever think you should be teaching their children. And I thoroughly agree with that. It is not the place of other people to teach my children what sex is and how to have it. It's something they're supposed to learn with their partners and by themselves. And what my place is to teach them the rudimentary of safe practice and safe hygiene, and but I'm not going to teach them positions, right? I'm not going to show them. Now, yes, you're going to seek it out. We've all, we seek it out. That was what my video about women have terrible sex was about, is, how much we seek out the tantalizing, titillating, just wanting to get off. But like I said there too, it has diminishing returns. It ruins your ability to have meaningful sex with your partner. And most people, and they've done studies on this, most people who, when they've pulled back, when they've stopped reading the erotica, when they stopped watching the porn, when they stopped engaging with it outside of sexual activity with their partner, have better sex and more meaningful sex and more enjoyable sex, right? So what purpose does it have in a book if all it exists to do is titillate? It doesn't. And then, okay, if the argument is, well, the sexual revolution and exploration and, we went from such prudish societies to, so there was a great quote I heard once, or I've seen over and over again, but I forgot where it originates, right? Which is, every child thinks they invented sex. Except we wouldn't be here if our parents didn't have sex, and our grandparents didn't have sex. And trust me, even the most really prudish societies, they were having sex, and a lot of it. And one of the things that I've noticed and does not get discussed enough is everyone's like, oh, we suddenly are all like really sexual in our books. And I'm like, have you read Candide? Have you read Fanny Price? Have you read, I think it's Moll Flanders? Even Jane Eyre, she alludes to sex. Here's the thing about it. They're just using their language of the day to express sex. The scenes are still sexual. It's actually more akin to what the professor was saying in his book, How to Read Literature Like a Professor. They're metaphorically having sex, so they will not say the genitalia or anything, but Actually, some of the scenes in these older books are way more graphic than stuff we have today. And trust me, in 100 years, when our jargon and vernacular and our euphemisms are out of style and people are going to read our stuff and they're going to be like, they weren't writing about sex. Where's the sex? Really, really good example of this is because of the emojis. Us calling certain appendages peaches and eggplants. And I've started to see that come up in books. Yeah, that's not gonna make any sense to anyone in 50, 60, 70, etc. years. It's focused in on our era. So they were writing sex. Of course, the most infamous one, the Marquis de Sade. And those books are, those books puts the, I don't know, I'm deciding if it's on par with Alchemized or not. Maybe it's slightly better. I don't know. At least the Marquis de Sade was not pretending he was writing literature. Victorians had a lot of pornos that have since been lost to time. And yeah, they don't use the language we use that helps us get off, but it was the language they used that helped them get off. The only thing they didn't have was the visual component, which we have an abundance of. They had pictures, obviously, but films. Some of the first films were pornos. People were exploring sex in media from the dawn of time. Oh, and for you Christians out there, read the Song of Solomon. Sex is everywhere. Heck, I remember learning about Samson in school once, and the teacher reading a passage and getting upset because she realized what she had read out loud was Samson was in bed with a prostitute. It's there. It's everywhere. Sex is everywhere. It's all over the Bible. It's all over Greek literature. It's all over... it's even in Beowulf, right? Is it in Beowulf or is that one violent? I don't know. Anyway, I'm getting tangential, but point is, it's everywhere. Should it be in our literature and so abundant in our literature? Especially the fact, like I said before, it seems to be like you can't even publish a book without having some sex in it. You can't even necessarily publish like young adult novels without some sex. It's just like, oh, they won't sell if you don't have sex in it. And the thing is, like, you shouldn't, okay? We need to get away from this. Sex is not, it doesn't serve the purpose that it should. And if it's not going to serve the purpose that it should, then it shouldn't be in our media, in our literature, and it shouldn't be oversaturated in our media and our literature. It's becoming a huge, huge problem. And the lines are so blurry as to what works and doesn't work. So again, I will reiterate, it's not that you can't have sex at all in your stories, but your sex can't be there to titilize. Now, will it titilize? Oh, 100%. Like, when I was 12, some of the shit I was reading was because, I knew it was going to have something in it. And then, I went back to it and realized, like, oh, they just kind of, like, kissed and then fell in the bed. And that was enough. Yeah, it doesn't take much for 12-year-olds to... Right. We need to stop with the porno. We need to stop with the overabundance of sex. We need to stop with this idea that you have to have sex in everything you do, and it's somehow, I don't know, makes it more adult. Because I've even seen this, where people are complaining online about like how women's stories, if they don't put graphic sex in them, end up becoming young adult novels. And I'm like, okay, first of all, no, your books are young adult novels. They tend to not really have plots or anything worthwhile. So, yeah, sorry. And second of all, you shouldn't have to put a useless, gratuitous sex scene in your book to be considered more legitimate. That really does say more about you as a writer than it does the story. Or it does the misogyny. I don't know. The argument didn't feel very robust because, again, there's just a huge problem right now in literature, in the publishing world, where it's just an overabundance of pornos and a lack of real literature. And so while we can talk about the morality of violence and we can talk about the purpose of violence, and I think we all instinctually see violence and want to discuss violence, sex is not for discussion. Sex is between two consenting adults and is supposed to be private. And we throw it up on all our books and act like it's supposed to be this great voyeuristic orgy. And it's ruining everything.